And just so you all know as well, I am recording this. I'm going to post it. So for all those people who could not be out here to see this today. So Cynthia, if you are sitting, so Keepstar Doomsdays have a relatively small bounce area. So as long as you're not right up next to the Titan or next to the Super, if you're 50 clicks off of each of them, it will not bounce to you. Honestly, the easiest way to do it is to sit on the Imp Palace and then just do a look at the um, Keepstar right at the McMahon Fist, and you will be well outside bounce range there. So here's the thing: if your carrier is in bounce range, that DD will bounce to it. And I don't know how well you tank your carrier, but a Keepstar Doomsday will kill a carrier in a single shot. So the other thing too, yeah, if you all want to get super close, as long as you are tethered on the Keepstar, it will not bounce to you. Let's see if anybody else is going to come in. We've got a few minutes here, so I'll give everybody a chance to come in because if you haven't done any of this, again, go ahead and if you've never seen one, I'm going to turn up the graphics on the recording here and I'll hide my UI so you all can actually see it and I'll zoom in. But so if you've never seen, now this is a Minmatar Doomsday that I'm going to fire there and then I'll hit it with the Keepstar. But if you've never seen a Titan Doomsday fired, it's kind of cool. Sure. I will admit that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I will admit for sure the Doomsday from the Rag is not nearly as kind of nice and fun as the others. Not to you. It's on the McMahon Fist. I've zoomed in pretty close for the recording, so I can see the Titan, the Keepstar, and my Super. But I mean, it's kind of up to you guys. As was mentioned just a moment ago, the Doomsday from a Rag is not quite as pretty as the others. I'll admit that. But the Keepstar one is pretty cool. So once we get done with the fun, shooting and everything like that, we'll just sit down and talk kind of like the history stuff, and how everything came about, all that kind of fun stuff. Yep, I've got a fleet up under Gamma. I mean, that's just if you want to ask questions or anything like that. But yeah, there's a fleet up. It's up under Ranger Gamma. Ghost Rider, which rag will be shooting? The uppermost one. Ranger Omega is the one who's going to fire. So it's a weapon restricted to Titans originally. Keepstars now have them as well, but it's a focused weapon, basically of pure death. When we do kind of the history of them, I'll go through how they've changed. This is the current iteration on them. Targets a single capital or super capital class ship. With this one, there are lances that you can hit subcaps and things like that with, but this one is specifically targeted against either a cap or a super cap. Well, so far that's not a thing, but okay, is anybody not here yet before I fire the first Doomsday? I got no pap for you. Okay, so if you're just coming in here, we're on the McMahon Fist keep started there. You'll see a Titan and a Super up, right, vertically up there. So Ranger Omega is the one that's going to fire the Doomsday, and then Ranger Gamma is the one who's going to be targeted with that. So it's going to go to that Nyx. And then once that effect is all done, then I'll shoot Ranger Omega with the Keepstar Doomsday. And if you are tethered, you're going to be fine. That Keepstar Doomsday will not bounce to you. If you are not tethered, you should not be near these ships. So are you talking about the range that it can hit something, or the bounce range? Because those are two different numbers on a Keepstar Doomsday. Bounce is usually 10 kilometers, but let me actually check that. CTB fudges those numbers sometimes. Let me make sure what that bounce range is. So the Titan is going to be shooting the Super, the Nyx that's there. Wait. So can you target a structure with a Doomsday? No, not with not with the Doomsday I'm about to fire. Lances, you can actually hit structures with them. Um, Mostly it's because we're terrible at aiming things like lances, and we clip the edge of a structure. Yeah. So what's the range of the Keepstar Doomsday? It's the lock range of the Keepstar. So if the Keepstar can lock you, the Doomsday can hit you. So it's over 200 kilometers. The Keepstar Doomsday doesn't technically have a range. It's if you can lock it, you can hit it. Okay, is anybody still in warp? Everybody ready? Uh, to use any of the weapons on a Keepstar, you have to have the ACL rolls to be able to gun it. But once you have that roll to be able to gun it, the Keepstar Doomsday is no different than like the PDS or the Newts, the target painters, anything like that. If you can sit in the gunner seat, you can use the Doomsday. There's no actual skill for using the Doomsday. Structure defense skills, if you look at them, They are dealing with capacitor usage of the structure. All right, everybody, I'm going to push the button so the Doomsday is firing here from the, uh, forgot the name of my ship, from the Rag to the Nyx. Okay, so this is the Rag to the Nyx. It's going green right now. And there it is right there. So just so you all know, that took all of the shields and 7% of the armor on this Nyx. This is a fleet Nyx. There's nothing special about its tank. But that was all of the shields and 7% of the armor. So for the record, it's 300,000 shields and 3.4 million armor. And it dropped it down to about 3.17. So Doomsday has right base damage, just like anything does. But then the resists go into that. So you can see that this is a focused Doomsday from the Titan there. Doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Right, so one Doomsday is not enough to kill a super. Okay, I'm going to close the distance from the Nyx and the Titan there so that it will bounce from the Keepstar. While that is doing that, because it's going to take a little while, let's talk a little bit of history of myself and how I got into it. Ghost Rider, so that's that's a fun thing. So you cannot fire it at a subcap anymore. But if there's a subcap within that range, they have been known to bounce to them. But it's based on mass. So if you've got a whole bunch of subcaps clustered around multiple caps, it's not going to bounce to the subs. There's 5 is the limit. So if you guys have been out with the Stormbringer doctrine that we introduced, not all that long ago, when you fire the Stormbringer weapon and it bounces like that, the Keepstar Doomsday looks just like that. It's the same basic principle. The Stormbringer one bounces more; it bounces to 10 targets, but it's the same idea. Valers, the thing with it is that when you used to be able to target subcaps with them, what you would do is you would target the command ships and it would bounce to the commands and you could wipe out an entire FC group, or you would target a Logi wing and you could wipe an entire Logi wing out, or a good portion of them. During the siege in 3 Tac D, during so some people call it World War B, some people call it World War B2, we call it Vietnam. During that, I fired a Doomsday into some group. I don't remember what it was, and I managed to clip the edge of their Logi wing, and I wiped their Logi wing out. And that fleet actually had to retreat because we smashed their Logi wing with a single Doomsday hit. Where we had one of our fleets right there with them, and they couldn't keep up. That fleet had to disengage. Now, CSB made it so you can't do that anymore. Keepstar Doomsdays cannot target subcaps. They can still bounce to them if the mass is high enough, but again, it's all about mass. It's a mass difference. Yep, never not Doomsday Brisk. We still do that, but it's a little bit harder now. You have to use a lance, and you got to pay a little bit more attention. Look, hey. So can you use Keepstars to kill subcaps? The honest answer to that is no, not really. Their ability to engage subcaps has been severely nerfed, as have all structures. So Keepstars do have a PDS. They do have, fighters. And in fact, if you're going to engage a subcap, the best way to do it is actually the fighters that they contain. Um, the PDS has been neutered pretty hard too. It's not all that useful. Used to be, not so much anymore. They have missile batteries too. Yeah, the fact that one of y'all shot the Keep Star is pretty much par for the course for Goonies. We're talking right now about Keep Star Doomsdays. And we're just going to go into the history. All right, y'all ready for the bounce? Yep, we are going to ride the lightning. So, for those of you who don't know, this is an old statement that we used to say all the time when the Keepstar Doomsday was going to be fired. So, again, it's going to fire at that rag. Okay, here it goes. Going green on that. It does take a few moments to come up and actually hit it, but it is active. And there it is. And that's why we call it riding the lightning. 9 minutes. So for the record, for you all, right, it did bounce to my Nyx. I dropped it about 700,000 damage. I warned you all about that. Yeah, and say if you're tethered, it's you're safe. But if you're untethered, there, it'll get you. And it bounces. Yeah, it bounces by range. Sorry, not by range, but by mass within that area. No, we did not ride the lightning because I wanted them to see how it would work. So the ride the lightning thing that Apple's talking about is when we would make a keep star miss. So they engage the weapon, and then if the target missed, right, if you warped away after it had hit, it would just sit there like impotent, and it was quite entertaining. We could. That's why I used this one. So somebody was asking how many hard points there are on a keep star. So right now we have ours fitted. So there are 4 missile launcher hardpoints on it. They usually have a bomb launcher. There's a PDS, the Doomsday itself. A lot of times there's a newt in it as well. And then the mid slots can vary, low slots can vary, but there's 4 launcher hardpoints for this, and then the bomb launcher. Yeah, no worries. Okay, so we're gonna go into kind of the history. If you want to look at the MOTD of the fleet, this is all Ank's fault that I'm here for the really simple reason that Sarah, who's in fleet, browbeat me into doing this class, and then I went to Ank and I was like, "Can you believe they all want me to do this? This is just a terrible idea." And his response was, "Well, that sounds interesting. I want to go." It's like, so this is all his fault. Uh, so let's go way back to the beginning. I've been playing Eve as long as, you know, Some people have. I started in 2009. Um, Basically, right after the expansion that brought out wormholes. So wormholes had just come out. That was a brand new thing at that point in time. As most people were, I was just a high sec guy doing that kind of thing. But one of the most important pieces, I think, for the story when you look at this is one event at the very beginning that basically caused all of these things. I was in high sec. I was actually in Jita, right at the trade center there. I was looking around, and the taxes on the NPCs were so high, and I was annoyed. And so I started looking for a player corporation that had lower taxes. I found one, sent in an app to join them, and the CEO at the time, who actually did become a good friend of mine, uh, made that corporation as a tax dodge. And that was the sole reason that corporation existed, was a complete tax dodge for himself. So I joined that corporation just about 2 weeks after I had joined Eve, first started playing it. It was right around Thanksgiving of 2009. And from there, he got me in touch with another group, another player corporation that I joined. We moved into wormhole space then, the beginning of about 2010. And this is something to where the all the knowledge that exists now of wormholes didn't exist back then. There was no cool things to track where you were in the wormholes, to do anything like that. None of that stuff existed at that point in time. For any of you who have been in wormhole space and are familiar with it, the story I'm about to tell you is true. It's ridiculous, but it is true. We moved into a wolf rat system. This is just one of the types. They've got modifiers to specific attributes for different systems. This one was a wolf rat system. And we moved into it with shield tank drakes. That's what we took in there. At that point in time, right, late 2000s, early 2010, 2011, drakes were the ship. So when you see them now, when people say, FC, can I bring my drake? That comes from that point in time. Drakes were the ship hull. Um, and as somebody just put in as soon as I said that, um, oh my God, what is wrong with you? Yeah. So a wolf rat system gives penalties to shields and bonuses to armor. We didn't know that. We took shield tank drakes in there, and we lived in that wormhole for quite some time. We eventually left. There was kind of a coup attempt in the corporation with some drama, and so we moved out of that wormhole many years later. Actually, it wasn't all that many years later, but it was quite a bit later. After that, I was back in HiSec. I created a new HiSec corporation, very much like what Karma Fleet University is now. There's a whole bunch of these kind of training corporations, um, and our goal there was to like teach people mechanics and do all those kind of things. So I did that for a little while. We had a HiSec alliance. I ran a griefing corporation as well at the same time. I was actually doing all of these things at once. Um, the guy that I told you about, that first CEO of the very first member corp I joined, he turned out to be an excellent infiltrator of HiSec corps, and he would join them, get all the information on their activity, their locations, their strengths, everything, and then we would go and war deck them, and then we would just sit on their routes and pick them off in HiSec. We were total bastards, but it's what we did. He turned out to be a fantastic scammer as well. So nowadays, when you go to trade something with a faction ship, okay, he did this with faction ships because you can rename ships, and he would sell people things like right stabber fleet issues, but he would just take a stabber and he would rename it stabber fleet issue and put it in a trade window. Now you can't do this with a contract because it doesn't care what the ship is named, it will show you the description on it. Trade windows you can. And at that point in time, there was no icon marking a faction hull. The icons are there now, right? It's in the upper corner. It's got this little green thing, right, that shows you that it's a faction hull. That didn't exist back then. So he would do that, and he made a killing doing this. Again, this was 2011, something like that. He scammed the same guy 3 times. He sold him, I think it was a caracal, um, as a fancy one. It was just a caracal, and I think 2 ravens is what he did. And the best part is this was not one transaction. The guy came back to him twice. He hadn't realized that he had been given false, goods with that. So somebody asked me, did I participate in the scams? No, I never did. Um, I'm terrible at it. I've tried. I tried it like once, and they saw through me in an instant, and I'm just like, all right, I'm clearly not cut out for this. So I let the other guy do it, and he scammed people left and right. But I was never good at doing that. Did was I a griefer? Yes, I was. Well, we were war deck griefers, but yes, I ran a war deck griefing corporation, so we did do that. And and the same guy who was doing those scams was our mole. He would infiltrate those corporations and gather all the intel for us, find out where they were mining, where they were ratting, where they were doing mission running, whatever they're doing. High sec, it's usually mission running and mining. Ratting, as we know it at nullsec, doesn't quite exist in high sec. It's not quite the same thing. There's a couple of locations. There's some static sites out in there like Bar Creek that you can go and just sit in. You're like, they'll spawn, you can shoot them, that kind of thing. But if fun story, if you all were on the Keepstar ref, right, the perimeter Keepstar ref, not the kill from the other day, but the ref from last week, one of our guys got killed by the enemy because they can flipped him. And this is an old high sec trick that griefers used to use, because what we would do is you'd be in your mining barge or your exhumer, and you would get the ore in your hold, right? You'd right click jettison and you'd get a jet can right next to you. And you just put your ore in there, and then periodically, right, you change out your alt or something like that. You bring a hauler out and pull the ore back in. Well, what we used to do, all griefers used to do this, is you'd go out there, you would take the ore out of their can and you put it in your can. Well, when the person's like, "What are you doing, you son of a bitch?" and they go and they take their ore out of now your can, they are now stealing from you, and you can shoot them. And that's called can flipping. And that happened to one of our guys just over a week ago. So the idea of this suspect and all that kind of stuff, that didn't exist at this point in time when I was running that griefing corp. That was not a thing back then. So criminal timer, suspect timer, that was not the mechanic at that point in time. Yep. Yeah. I will admit we kind of laughed a great deal on the command channels. We're like, damn, fucking high sec. That was pretty much the that was pretty much the gist of the command channels at that point. So if you guys want to type questions or anything in Fleet, I am watching that here. Um, so was HiSec much more dangerous than it is today? Yeah, that's true. They have made HiSec a lot safer than what it was when I started. What's that? 14 years ago. It has changed a lot. The bumping mechanics have changed a lot. One thing, I was talking to Joe Painter just the other day. I miss Bernjita. I loved Bernjita. It was my favorite time of year. It's a crazy amount of work for him and Mini True. Uh, what was his Bony Tooth Isk Thompson? I believe that was his name. He's the predecessor on Mini Love. And Warakini. Yep. Thank you, Apple. I did. Uh, so the let me get back to that. So what they did is they changed the bumping mechanics to where, which is the way it is now. And you guys have seen this. If you ever are on a fleet, specifically with cap ships, you'll hear the FC say, like Apple, who's with us right now, he'll say, hit warp and don't touch anything. Because if you're bumping, it's 3 minutes and you will go into warp no matter what. Now, that's more of don't worry about bubbles and things, but always listen to the cap FCs. But they changed it. So back in the day, that 3 minute thing was not a thing. You could bump somebody for hours. And we used to do it, right? The Mini Love guys would bump them away from gates. They couldn't come into warp. They couldn't do anything. The only thing they could do was log off. And if they did that, the fleets would immediately jump the queue and go and kill them. Let me see. Verdi, so you're talking about high sec alts there for level fours. I honestly don't know what you're talking about there, man. Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times you do that like with Caldari Navy so that you could get lower taxes in Jita. Um, but the other thing that you could do, maybe this is what you're talking about, was the old R&D agents, which is how you used to get T2 BPOs. People still do those when I first started. You would get the R&D agents, even though invention mechanics had been in place, the T2 BPOs weren't being seeded anymore. And so you would get R&D agents. Like I still have some R&D agents. Um, but yeah, I'm honestly, I'm not sure what you're talking about, man. Decoys, dude, damn, I don't know how to pronounce your name. So is Burn Gene impossible now? Yes, pretty much. It's because, yeah, so the key, I remember one year, I don't honestly remember which year it was. We did Burn Jita for years and years. We did a Burn Amar one year as well. Um, but these started from the Ice Interdiction campaign, which was in, anybody remember? It was like, I think it was 2012, something like that. Um, and it was where the most common pause tower, for those of you who reach way back into your brains, pause towers still do exist, by the way, but they're not used nearly as much, was Galanti because of the bonuses to them for um, reactions. And so we did we goons did an oxygen isotope interdiction where they were in high sec ganking everybody who was mining the ice that would give you oxygen isotopes, because the oxygen isotopes came from Declan and that area where goons were living at the time. And so they cornered the entire market on that. That led to Burn Jita and the Burn of Mars, where we would gank usually freighters. Freighters were the primary target, but jump freighters were fair game. Orcas were also targeted at that point in time. Every now and then, if there was nothing and people were bored, we'd go out and gank mission runners or Sometimes a mining barge, but you didn't need a whole fleet to kill a mining barge. Um, First ones we used were catalyst destroyers, and then the next time, or subsequently, we've used catalysts, we've used coercers. Valeris, the Hulkageddon, yeah, that was Bernjita. That's what that is. It's the same kind of an idea. So we did the Ice Interdiction campaign. Hulkageddon was next, and then that became Bernjita. So it's just that's kind of that piece. So it started as the Ice Interdiction campaign, and I want to say again 2012. I don't remember that for sure. Something like that. Hulkageddon was the next year, and then formal what we called Bernjita started the year after that, and it went almost 10 years between all of those things. Um, the last Bernjita, I believe, was in 2019 or 2020. It was on the launcher. It was on the launcher. You're right. Apple's not making that up. It was absolutely on the launcher. It said, it didn't say like, Bernjita. It said, there's people ganking in and around the trade hubs, like use caution. It said something like that. Um, and what was amazing, I'm sorry, drop. Yeah, yeah, they actually did it. We set records every year that we did it for the number of freighters and jump freighters killed. We used to have a kill board tracking thing where we would do that. The whole setup, we ganked hundreds of freighters and jump freighters. You know, as we went through, the bill was unbelievable. And the craziest part is that when we would gank the jump freighters and freighters, right, orcas, whatever it was, we would have a neutral orca come in and loot the wreck, take everything, and then that money was used to fund the next year's Bernjita. Um, I was on one of the fleets again. I don't remember what year it was. We lined up on this orca, we had it, and then all of a sudden somebody jumped into comm, started screaming that we were about to gank the other fleet's orca, but it was neutral. So our fleet commander didn't know that it was literally the other fleet's orca that we were about to gank, and we almost shot it. We were lining up and approaching to fire. We very nearly killed our own orca one year. I've asked Joe to do it, and the mechanics is just it just isn't there anymore. It's unfortunate. I loved, yeah. CCP has to radically change it. Well, so yeah, I mean, so ganking a freighter is pretty much what you're talking about right there, or a miner. The Hulkageddon, as somebody mentioned earlier, was the same thing. That was specifically targeting Hulks. So the Hulkageddon was at the time the mining barges and the exhumers were specialized. So if you wanted to mine Mercoxic ore, you used this hull. If you wanted to mine ice, you used this hull. It was Mackinaws for the ice. And if you wanted to mine regular ore that was not Mercoxic ore, you used the Hulk. So the Hulk again was targeting regular ore mining. Again, CCB's changed that a lot to where that specialization doesn't exist in those hulls, but it did at that time. Yeah, so the thing that you got to remember that Apple just said is, I mean, can you gank a ship in high sec now? Yeah, you can gank any ship in any security space in high sec if you're willing to pay enough to do it, right? You can gank a bulkheaded freighter in a 1.0 system. It's not that hard to do, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you more than that freighter is probably carrying, right, to do it. And that's the difference now, which has made these things so much harder. Um, we used to do it because we could. Yeah, 25 catalysts. No, you need about 50 to gank an orca. It's something like that. I say it used to be 50. Is it like 75 now, Apple? Oh, yeah. Burn Jita was a case of the scenario I was just talking about, where we ganked everything and the profits didn't really matter. We salvaged it, we looted all that kind of stuff, but we were out there to just be Goonies and be a dick because we could. That's what we were doing there. Okay, so we kind of jumped around. So let's go back to like 2012, give or take. Um, I was kind of done with high sec. I was bored. I was living in wormhole space. Yada yada yada. Didn't really care for it all that much. Moved into created my own corporation, and we joined a very small nullsec alliance that at the time lived in Oasa. It's an alliance called Strange Brew. They don't exist anymore, but that's where they were at that point in time. Yeah, that was so we used to live there, many many years ago. This would be about 2012, something like that. And so I was a member corp CEO in it. Again, small corporation, small alliance. We were allied at that point in time um, to several alliances that don't exist anymore. There were a lot of Russian groups living in that area. Still, the drone lands kind of piece to it. Big thing to remember at this point in time here are Valera. So are Orcas tankier than battleships? Yes, in high sec they are. Um, the jump bridges that we know today were radically different. Okay, let's step back to this. Jump bridge mechanics worked basically the same as they do now. You would anchor them on a pause instead of a citadel, but that's the only difference there. But the big change is that you could have two jump bridges in one system. So when you see references to like the highway, this was literally where you could get on at a certain point in there and never have to take a Stargate. You could cover entire regions without using a Stargate because you take one jump bridge, let's say here into 1DQ, and our jump bridge here goes to QY1E. Well, you jump into QY1E, and then from QY1E, you could go to, let's say, DTAC W. It's ridiculous, but let's just say, okay? You did not have to take a Stargate. Um, the CSM at the time got some high sec idiots on it who convinced CCP that that was stupid, and that was changed. Shit, does anybody remember like 2015, 2016, 2017, something like that? Oh, so it might have been 13 or early 14 then. It's been the way that it is now with one gate per system for a very long time. Yeah, so let's talk about this because this is a classic one. Now I know Apple knows the answer to this, so Apple doesn't get to say it. But does anybody know what the maximum red fatigue timer was at the very beginning with jump fatigue or space aids as we call it? It was not 3 hours. It was not 30 days either. There was no maximum. The very first version of jump fatigue, there was no maximum to either the red or blue timers. Uh, somebody ended up now, Valeris. You were stuck with 1 year. Yours is not the highest number I've heard. Somebody ended up with like a century of it because it was an exponential curve. Now that did not last very long because it was pretty. Even CCP woke up to the fact that that was a bullshit mechanic. And within a few weeks, that was brought down to a maximum of 30 days. It was reduced again. Now, this is the blue timer. This is that blue timer. It was reduced again to, I think it was 7 days, and now it's 5 hours. But the very original version of it, there was no limit to the red or blue timers at that point in time. At this, yeah, it was bad. And at the same time that they introduced jump fatigue, they also nerfed the jump ranges of supers, titans, all caps. Faxes didn't exist then; it was carriers and dreads, and jump freighters. It used to be that you could jump a carrier, I believe it was 14 light years at that point in time. Uh, yep, and all you had to do was to recharge your cap. So we used to fly around with, you would have three fits. You'd have your travel fit, you'd have your cap fit, and you'd have your combat fit. And your cap fit was literally like cap rechargers and things like that. Because here's the fun part on jump mechanics for capitals. The absolute value of your capacitor, right? The number of gigajoules in your capacitor doesn't matter. It's the percentage of it that matters. So there are certain modules, right, that will lower your absolute amount of cap. And so you'd put those in there and you'd put cap rechargers in there. You'd have full racks of these things. And you could literally jump. I've seen people do it. Before that 10-second invuln timer would end, your cap would be recharged and you could jump again. So the only thing that limited the movement of fleets at that point in time was honestly the number of sinos that you had, which is why back in that time, right, back in those days, if you wanted a cap, you had to have at least two sinos, be able to move them yourself. We kept that to a certain extent for quite a while, to where, if you wanted to join like Cap Swarm, you needed to have a sino. That's not really a thing anymore. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Apple. Has that changed? I don't believe that's still required. Apple and I, yeah, it is still recommended. And if you all are thinking about a cap, you should have a sino to move that. Um, but Apple and I come from, Leonardo does as well, come from the days when those were absolutely required. You had to have them. And now, as was just mentioned in Fleet, that's a critical thing. Well, you could also put sinos on anything. That's true. We used to do noob ship sinos, and if you got sino 5, you could put, I think it was 2 or 3 cargo hold expanders, whatever it was, into a noob ship. Right, that they call them corvettes now. They were called noob ships then, and you could light one sino with it. But you had to have sino 5 to do it back in that time. So there's a lot of us who have these noob ships with sinos spread throughout. I mean, even today, because we're too lazy to go get them, spread throughout the galaxy. It comes from that. Yeah, I think honestly I trashed most of mine because I just didn't give a shit anymore. But most of us had dozens of them spread all over the place. Yep, yep. Now you have to use recons for them. Um, yeah, so T2 ships, and this is a funny one that Apple just mentioned. They've changed this. So also back in the day, to get capitals, you had to have Battleship 5 to actually train caps. They changed that. You don't need that anymore. You can do it with Battleship 4 now. But back then you had to have cap. You have to have. Is it down to 3 now? Oh my God! You all people get this so much easier than back in my day. Jesus Christ. That's true. We didn't have destroyer skills back then either. Well, we had those skills. We didn't have racial destroyer and racial battlecruiser skills. So this is, yeah. So Ghost Rider just mentioned it as Apple's giving me a hard time. He's not wrong on that. Um, Back in the day, destroyer was just, that's it. Destroyer does it. Does the skill. So you train that to 5, and you had battlecruiser. You train that to 5, and then when CCP announced the Switch, what they did is that everybody who had Destroyer 5 got all four races Destroyer to 5. They just copied it down. So when that change was first announced, what you saw is that everybody was madly training Destroyer and Battlecruiser 5 to get it up before the switch over. There were no injectors back then. Um, free, yeah, and free skill points like we get them every 4 or 5 days in the launcher, right, and all those kind of things. That was so unheard of that when they did the learning skills, we'll go way back in time for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about. Good, they were fucking awful. These were 5 skills that you had to train so that all of your other skills trained faster. It was um, like it's the same ones now for like willpower and all those kind of things, intelligence, memory. Well, we had implants for those at the time too, but these were actual skills to train for it. So your first like month, 5 weeks, all you did was train those learning skills, and that's it. You couldn't do anything else, or your life got harder. Mr. Harry, I'll come back to that here in just a second. The game, they were removed, and what ended up happening is no skill injectors. Getting SP from CCP was unheard of. So everybody who had not trained those skills madly trained them because they were rank 1 skills so that you would get them on your character and you could apply them to whatever you want. And if you can find market data from that far back, you can actually look at the orca, the price of an orca, and you will see it spike because everybody dumped skills from those learning skills into being able to fly orcas. You can actually see the price of an orca spike from it. If you're looking in Fleet there, Mysterio mentioned the skill queue. There were no alpha and omega as we know them today. There were actually a whole bunch of clone grades. We'll come back to that bullshit too in here in a minute. But your skill training queue was very similar to what the alpha skill queue is today. So you could train a skill if it started within 24 hours, and then you could train it no matter how long it was. Yeah, so the alpha way it is now is the way they all were at that point in time. Oh, they changed that too? Oh, wow. Okay, so back in this point then, it was 24 hours. The skill had to start training within 24 hours. But if you had like a 30-day skill, it would do that. It just had to start within 24 hours. Yep, that's what it is. Well, no, that's from this time. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. At the very beginning, it was you're training this, and that's it. There was no skill. It was just train this thing. Um, Yeah, so the piece that Apple's talking about there with the boost, what you have to remember um, nowadays, boosts are on grid, right? You have to be on grid when the boost module like fires, and you have to be in close proximity, area effect kind of a thing. What he's talking about there is back in the day, you did not. Boosts were done almost always off grid because you only needed five. Well, you needed six. You needed a fleet booster and you needed five wing boosters. And then so when you look at old videos from the day or you hear the old comms, they'll say, "Who's got squad command?" And you wanted somebody who had the leadership skill that was just mentioned there to five because they could transfer those boosts to the 10 people and they'd be put in squad command. And then you'd get the squads under each wing. And so you needed that person, you needed the wing command five, and that would cover all the squads. And then you needed the FC five to cover all the wings. So you only needed six boosters to boost an entire 256 man fleet. And we used to put them in deep space. Most of the time we used Tengu. Some people used Lokis and things like that, but these were boosting T3Cs. And what you would do is it was the most nerve wracking job I've ever had is spamming D-scan looking for virtue probers trying to kill us. Because when you entered warp, your boost would turn off. And so you would be spamming D-scan looking for these probes as they're trying to kill you. And you'd have to warp and you'd have to tell the FC, whoever's doing it, it's like, you know, I'm in warp here. Their virtues are trying to get us, and our virtues were trying to get theirs. So when you hear people talk about virtue probers, they were trying to get off-grid boosters. Mining boosts, you could do it. Ghost Rider just said as well. Back in the day, we used to take orcas and rorquals. You put them inside a pause in a system. You'd open the fleet advert up. You would turn on your boosts, and you'd put a thing in the MOTD as like, hey, if you feel like it, give me a tip for doing this, and you could boost an entire system all day while you're at work. We used to do that all the time. The clone grades, yeah, the clone grades that, um, sorry, I'll get to deep say. So the clone grades that Apple mentioned. Right now we have two clone grades, right? We got Alpha and Omega. Back then we had about 20 of them. Somebody linked a picture of it in KF Industry Discord the other day, and I got mad at him because it's such a nightmare from back in the day. But they would be different levels of skill points. So you would dock in a station and you would go to upgrade your clone, and it cost you money. These were really expensive at the higher tiers, and it would protect a certain number of skill points. If your skill training went over the current grade and you got potted, you would lose some of the skill points between wherever you were and that value of your clone grade. And so you would hear people every now and then who would be out on a fleet and they would forget. And so the FCs used to say this all the time. If you get potted, update your clone, upgrade your clone. And you would hear people who forgot and they would be flying in an alpha clone and they would get potted. You could always tell when it happened because you would hear somebody just cursing. And yeah, it was a nightmare. It was the reason why in the like 2015-16 era, I didn't go on frigate fleets because the clone cost like me 100 million every time I got potted to upgrade my clones. And I'm like, this is bullshit. So I stopped going on frigate fleets at that point in time, which a lot of people did because it was so expensive to update your clones. Um, that was removed. I honestly don't remember when. It seems like it was around the Citadel expansion, but I don't recall for sure. Was that about when you started? Okay, yeah, so that would have been. Yeah, that's not a thing. All skill levels tap out at 5. Oh, yeah, yeah. That did happen. Yeah. And that was a bitch of a skill. Yeah. Um so Valeris, you were talking about, do T3Cs still lose skill level when killed? This is a fun thing. So they did originally, But if you ejected out of the hull before you died, you would not actually lose that skill. You would not lose those skill points. That was subsequently changed, and because people were just abusing it, because you'd get to it. People like PL, we rag on PL a lot, in my opinion, for good reasons. But PL was notorious for doing this back when they were actually relevant. They would do that all the time. Sarah asked me a question, and I forgot. Sarah, you had a question for me that I forgot. Oh yeah, the deep safes. Um, so deep safes today are the most common way that you get a deep safe today is from an incursion, because the signatures that spawn today, right? So mining sites, the wormholes, any anomaly like that, they're within a specific number of AUs of another celestial. Usually it's planets. Sun can do it too. Stargates, sometimes. Stargates are usually in proximity to another one, but it's a specific number of AU out from them. I believe it's 10, but don't quote me on that. I think it is something like that. But back in the day, that was, is it 4 to 8? Zealous? Okay. Um, Back in the day, there was no limit to that. And so if you wanted to have a true deep safe, all you had to do was just get something, an object out there, and you could bookmark it. A lot of people used to use fighters. You would basically drop a fighter, kind of disconnect from it. It would do this warp thing while you're in warp. You would do this. It was a very weird mechanic, but it would throw the fighter a crazy amount of distance. And then you would warp out to that, and you do it again, and you would do it again, you would do it again. There were reports of people having deep safes like a million AUs out of a system. It was ridiculous. But you could put a super or a titan out there and you could never scan them down. And so that's a true deep safe of the old days. When this new restriction was brought in, CCP moved all of those old safes to the maximum distance from, I think it was the outermost planetary orbital. They did something like that. So there's still a good distance out there from people who played at that point in time, but they're not, 3, 4, 5, 600, 1,000 AUs out like they used to be. So a deep safe now, when you go to make a new one, most people do it with incursions. Um, but yeah, that's the old style. Scanning is a different one now too. Back in the day, you would drop one scan probe and it would scan everything in the system, and it took 10 minutes. Now base scanning time is 10 seconds, and there's, combat probes to find ships and other things, and then core probes to find technically anoms. But back in the day, it was one probe, and it would scan everything in the system, but it took 10 minutes. Let me see. We're up to about 2015 now, 2014. From my journey, I was still a member corp CEO. Brave, sorry, Brave, not Brave. Strange Brew had been invaded by PL. We lost our home in Oasa. We ended up crashing on the couch of it, and in fact, joining Razor. Um, and I know just a couple of people just flinched and they're like, Razor, oh my God, those guys are terrible. They are now. At the time, they were considered a fairly heavy PvP group. They lived in Tenal back then. Did I have the wrong one? Let me check the. This would have been 2015 or something like that. Yeah, no, it was after that. Yeah, yeah, all Galactic North, all the way in the north. So you're. They did. They had some really good ones. So I was up there. We ended up. So we now call it we dotting, where you take your alliance and you compress it into a single corp. We did that back then. We didn't know that's what it was called, but that's what we did. So we collapsed Strange Brew, the Alliance, into Strange Brew, the corporation. Um, I became a director-esque in Strange Brew at that time. I was running jump freighter service, then doing reactions, things like that. We had a coup attempt in our corporation, ended up being a huge schism. The corporation just disintegrated. And from there, I moved to join an alliance called Fatal Ascension, which actually Apple mentioned just a little while ago, who at that point in time was living in Cloud Ring. Yeah, so I joined them when they were in Cloud Ring, and it was at that point in time, the CFC didn't exist. It was called DECCO back then. Um, and I was at the battle that created the CFC. We were invading Fountain. We were going after an alliance called IT, literally the letters IT. They lived in Fountain at that point in time. This was a remnant of the old Bob from the Great War of 2008. And I should have mentioned this at the beginning. If you all want to see the history of Eve, literally get the books. There's two of them, right? The Empire of Eve and the Empire of Eve's like Part Two or whatever he put it. Those two books are excellent. The author did a really good job on looking at the history of them, and I think he did a reasonable job of remaining neutral. It's not propaganda for us, not propaganda against us. Yes, they are books. They're printed hardback books. I've got leather bound. Is it? I've got leather bound versions of mine because I'm that big of a nerd. I bought them. I think I've got that one too. Yeah, they've done so. The Empires of Eve is an excellent thing. Again, there are two of them, but it's an excellent one there. Anyway, so we invaded IT Alliance. They were living in Fountain there. Um, we went to siege 6 VDT at the time. That was IT's capital, and we were going through. Now, before we get to that, thank you, Misty. That's the link. Empires of Eve, right there. Um, Before I tell you this story here, you have to remember that tie dye did not exist then. So when you talk and you hear people are going, oh, the black screen of death, this is that era to where you would jump into a system in a big fight and you might load, you might not. You might die without ever seeing anything on your screen. Um, the Battle of M2 where they were talking about, from our last really big war there, where you're getting Titans died before they would load. That's kind of the way it was at this point in time for everybody. There was no tie dye then. We jumped into 6 VDT. I was really a nobody. I was a line guy. I was flying a Wolf assault frigate. We actually used assault frigates for tackle at that point in time. We had an entire fleet of assault frigates just to go around and tackle everything. We're sitting there, we're on comms, our FC's talking to us, and all of a sudden a cap and super cap fleet jumps in. They're all neutrals. They're, hostile. There's red, there's yellow, there's neutrals. We panicking a little bit. We knew our super and cap fleet was coming, but they didn't get there in time, and we're just like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? So RFC, I honestly don't remember who it was, but RFC turned us in. We were getting ready to go in and attack them. Um, you could not tackle supers and titans at that point in time with assault frigates. You had to use interdictors and everything like that. A scram would not work on a super or a titan. They were E-war immune at that point. We lined up. We were just getting ready to warp, and RFC comes onto the comms and starts screaming at us that they were blue fleet and to everybody disengage and to break off. It was such a heavy strain on the servers that none of the standings were showing except the security status. So those people who had been, bastards in high sec and had terrible criminal status, that was what was showing up for us. It turned out to be an entirely blue cap and super fleet, but we could only see their security status. So they looked like hostiles to us. We subsequently went on to win that battle and that war. IT was shattered. If you want to look up the guy, his name was Somali, who was the leader of IT at the time. His propaganda was not good. He made an effort, but it was terrible. Um, his speeches took forever to do. Rose, did he lose the most Titans? I don't know that that is true anymore. At the time, it was. I don't honestly know who holds the records for the most Titans being lost. At the time, it was him, but I don't think it is anymore. Yeah, he was Shrike. So he was in that first original Titan to be killed. Um, he's not technically the first Titan to be killed. There was another one, but it was like a DC thing, and so some people don't count it. Shrike was the first one to be killed while it was manned, and actually, fought over. But there was another one before who had a DC. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Aren't you sure? Yeah, it's Steve. That's right. Yeah, it was Steve. Nope, nope. I was right. It was Steve. Oh yeah, you've got actually a fleet called Steve. Yeah, the first one was called Steve. Yeah, they did a giveaway from CCP, like one of the Christmas ones one year where you could get that. I think I've got one of those still too. Yeah, it became a memorial there, just like the one in M2. There's one there. There's one in BTAC-R as well. Let me see. So we took IT Alliance out. They collapsed. They kind of reformed, not really. Um, they were pretty much done. In the end, Fatal Ascension moved into Fountain as well as Tess. Tess lived in Fountain as well. I had left Fatal Ascension at that point. I actually joined. Can't believe it. I'm gonna say it because I'm never gonna hear the end of it. But I actually joined TNT. I was in with Wibla for a while. Um, the corp I was in was actually completely Aussie. I was the only American in the corporation, so it was just me. I was always by myself. Um, And I'll be honest, that's a little dull when everybody in your corp is in a completely different time zone from you. I never saw them. We never talked. I went back to high sec for a little while as I was trying to kind of figure out what I was doing. I had some kind of shit going on in my real life at that point in time. I never technically took a break from Eve, but I effectively took a break. Like I would log in, update skills, and that was about it. Um, After that, I started looking around for a new corporation, and I came back to what was then the CFC. Again, it was incorporated the CFC right at the beginning of the IT war. I came back and joined Wildly Inappropriate Dot. Again, that was where the whole idea of we dotting a corporation comes from. There used to be an alliance, lived in Delve, collapsed down into a company, and so I rejoined the CFC by moving into we dot. We were living in deck at that point in time. Uh, I was still a line guy, didn't really do anything. But back then, to join them, you had to have your own capital ship. Whether it was a destroyer, sorry, whether it was a dreadnought or a carrier, didn't matter. I think I had both at that point in time. There were no faxes then. This is still pre the fax changeover. Lived in deck until we lost deck during the what we call the Casino War. This was right when you got the changeover to Aegisov occurred as well. Back in that point before that, you had TCUs and iHubs, just like we do today. That didn't really change. But you had SBUs, which is how you would siege a system. You'd put one on each gate. If you had the majority of them under your control, things would go be reinforced. You could go and attack, like the iHubs. You could go and attack the TCUs, the outpost if they had one. None of the outposts still exist per se, but if you all look around this grid where we are in 1DQ, all these faction fortissars you see here, these are the old outposts. So an outpost was a station, looked an awful lot like an NPC station that was player built, but they could not be destroyed. You could change them, right? Change ownership on them. You could lock people out of them, but you couldn't actually kill them. As Keepstars started coming in and all these kinds of pieces, CCP converted all of those old outposts into the named fortizars that you see here. So the names that you see on all these is the system that outpost, right, that we wanted to memorialize a outpost that was in that system. And that's where all these names come from that you're seeing here. Well, we're on the grid. This is from all these. They did have different bonuses. There was a Minmatar one that was used for refining. The Amar one was used for production. The Kaldari one was used for research, and the Galenti one was used for. It didn't really have a use. It was like an, yeah, it was like an office. Yeah. Valeris, the capital. We moved the capital so many times that I honestly don't remember which one it was. It could easily have been a Galanti one. Most corporations had offices in the Galanti ones because they had tons of office slots. Um, but I honestly don't remember that. I will tell you a fun story on a capital commander. This was K Color. For any of you all who remember K Color, uh, I loved him. He was one of our cap commanders back in the day. I wish he'd come back and play, but I really liked him. He quit a number of years ago. But we were doing a move up from somewhere to somewhere. We were in deck. I don't remember. I think we were moving to like OA something, some YO. I think we were moving to YO from somewhere else. And he decided to be a little cheeky. VFK was not too far away from the capital at that point in time. And he sent out a ping saying that VFK Beacon was AWOXing. We thought it was hilarious. We all got a kick out of it. We're just laughing with each other on comms until Marana shows up. Those of you who don't know who Marana is, very nice lady until you get on her bad side. Till Marana shows up and says, "What the hell are you doing?" And she said this in open comms. K Color's like, "What are you talking about?" Turned out there was a goon named VFK Beacon who was online and out flying around, and people were hunting him because K Color sent that ping. What he meant was the Sino beacon, right? The jump beacon in the system, right? But it turned out there was a guy actually named VFK Beacon in the area flying around, and goons were hunting him. And so Marana jumped into our comms to chat with K Color. Uh, it was there was pings after that. Probably 5 or 6 of them came out after that. Yeah, yeah, it was a good time. I was quite entertained. I thought it was hilarious. I was still a line member at that point in time. I was in the cap group, but I was still a line member. I didn't even have a super back then. Just dreads and carriers. Again, we didn't have faxes. That those had not been introduced yet. Uh, so for those of you who are wondering, what did we do for faxes? They were carriers. They were called triage carriers. You'd put a triage module, just like the same one that you use on a fax today, but you just put on a carrier back at that point in time. So if I missed your question, do type it in there. White, I'll come to yours here in just a second. But if I missed another one, just let me know.
They've reached the wall over here on the fence on this side because they're putting our blocks in right now.
Oh,
So
okay,
you have to be real careful when they let somebody in.
okay, okay. Well, pauses for research worked really well. Building on them, not so much. Like hulls, sure, but like building ammo and things like that, it was terrible. Um, so yeah, that was a thing. I was actually talking to one of the KF industry guys about that just the other day. So back in the day, we would compress minerals, and the way you would do that is you would get a. Almost everybody used 425s for this, but you would just get a module. Again, almost always use 425s, and you would build them right wherever it was that you had the ore minerals. Usually, this came out of HiSec, like out of Jita, and you would import them and then reprocess them. And if any of you have done any reprocessing now on it, you might be saying, well, that's a stupid idea. Reprocessing yields are limited to about 56%. They are now. Back then, they were not. And you could effectively get almost 100% reprocessing for it. But the volume of minerals used to make the gun was larger than the gun itself. And that's why we called it mineral compression. So you could take like 1,000 cubic meters of minerals and compress it into 10 cubic meters of guns, import the guns, and then you'd reprocess it and you'd get like 995 cubic meters of minerals. That's just ridiculous. Minerals are tiny, but it's that kind of ratio. Yeah, so at a line member, Mr. You respond to that. It's a somebody who does not have a role within the corporation or within the alliance. You're in there, you're doing, your thing. You may go on strat ups and corp runs and go mining and everything like that, but you're just the guy, you're just the bee, right? Or gal. There definitely is some yeah, yeah, that's fair. I don't think I could either, but yeah, there's oh yeah. Uh yeah, that's totally fair. Sarah, you asked about DJ earlier and I forgot him. Yeah, so DJ was the head of Goon Swarm before Mitani took over. There are videos of him from DJ from FanFest. He was wearing it's like an old style pilot get up, like a 1930s 1940s pilot outfit. He was at a panel from. So he was head of Goon Swarm at that point. Before him was a guy named Remedial, and then Uh, so as far back as I go in the history, it was Remedial, then DJ, then Mittens, and now Asher. So DJ was the leader of Goon Swarm um, over 10 years ago because Mittens was head of Goon Swarm for over 10 years. So DJ would have been 2004, 5, 6 in that neighborhood. When was he? Yeah, he did still. Yeah, so Darius Johnson is DJ. That's when somebody says Darius Johnson and DJ, it's the same person. I forgot about Dead Tier. Thank you. I totally forgot. I know him from a different role, but yeah. So when you hear somebody say, "Oh, the CEO of Goonswarm like steals our Titan fund," you just heard that story. He did. Yeah. Valeris, the carrier that saved Goonswarm. I honestly don't know which story that is. There was a whole bunch of those about carriers. Does anybody know that specific reference? Yeah, and that forgetting to pay a bill is what triggered the Halloween War, um, where the Battle of BTAC-R occurred. That was the beginning of the Halloween War. That was because of a failed payment to CCP, and the Sov dropped there. What mechanic do I miss the most? That's a good question. I honestly, for me, the Fozzie Sov stuff, right? It's technically called Aegis Sov. Most would call it Fozzie Sov. Um, the sieging SBUs, doing pause warfare, the old Dominion Sov system. I love doing that. When we sieged and kicked test out of Fountain, we still used pauses at that point in time. And I honestly can't tell you guys how many hours we spent in bombers with a blops. We'd have a blops with us and, a wing of bombers. And we go around sieging pause towers. And we would do that every night for about 3 or 4 hours, and we'd all go to bed. And the next night we'd do it again. Um, I've shot outposts with siege bombers. I did that with Asher one night. We were trying to push this outpost. I'm pretty sure it was test. It was still in Fountain. We were trying to push them because they were at war with us at that point in time. They were no longer part of the CFC. Um, we were trying to push it into, I think, final reinforce so that we could capture it. And the fleet that was supposed to do it got pulled off for something else. So we're out there trying to beat the regen on this thing, and we managed to push a outpost into final reinforce with bombers. Um, the I've done the Sov wanding thing. I've done Aegis stuff. Um, as a recon guy, we were originally tasked with doing that before we had GSFOE. Didn't exist then. Recon used to do that stuff. I hate that. I hate that mechanic so much. I've managed pauses. I've set them up. I've configured them. I've done all that kind of stuff. I've done it with Citadels as well. Um, but that Dominion style piece, I miss that. We originally thought when Citadels were brought in that what was going to happen is the number of Citadels in a system would determine who controlled it, which is how the SBUs worked, more or less. And pauses did too. But that's not what they ended up doing. So if I had to pick a mechanic, I think I would go back to the old Dominion Sov um, with it, just because I liked pause warfare. I mean, shooting SBUs was annoying. Don't get me wrong, that was terrible. But if you all have been on a Entosis up, I honestly would challenge you to say that that is more fun than shooting something, because at the end it would blow up. Right? You got to blow some shit up. So Leonardo has one in there, onlining pause modules for an hour. Okay, I'll grant you that. Not so much. Yeah, that one was not so much. The funnest part, I think you guys will get a kick out of this. I was on a cap fleet. We were in deck. Somebody had hit an allied pause tower and had reinforced one of the guns. They damaged one of the guns. Well, again, faxes didn't exist back then, and they had pushed it into the hull. And repairing hull on the old days, the old mechanics, was a nightmare. And so the FCI, I'm pretty sure it was K Color again, just ordered us all as like, all right, yeah, I was flying a carrier at the time. It's like, launch your fighters. Carriers could carry regular drones at that point in time, but we used fighters. and just kill it. It was easier to blow up this gun and put a new one in than it was to try and repair it. Well, we started to shoot it, and when you would shoot pauses or their modules, the owner would get a little pop-up, a little message, a little notification that says this person is shooting your tower, your gun. It happened to be my name on it. So I get this convo from somebody who I didn't know, turned out to be the CEO of that corporation, who literally opened his convo with, "What the fuck are you doing?" And it was just happened to be, when the time triggered, it was my shot that did it. I was like, well, I'm on the fleet with K Color, and he told us to shoot it. He's like, we'll see about that. And then he came back. He's like, okay. So yeah, that was a little scary. I was again a line guy. I had a carrier and a dread, but I was nobody. I was a nobody in there. I was a bitch. It was so bad. Yeah, trying to repair pause modules was just. I mean, if it was shields, okay, shields are easy. Armor, not a big deal. But if it had more than like 10% hull damage, most of the time we just look at it and go, let's just kill it. Yeah, it's just terrible. That mechanic has never really been adapted to like kind of fix the modern thing. But since they got rid, quote unquote, got rid of pause modules, it's not as big of a thing anymore. Okay, let's see. So let's bring us up to the casino war with Deck. Um, the short version of that is the bad guys. Oh, sorry. So the short version coming up to the casino war is that the bad guys had effectively unlimited ISK from the casinos. That's why we call it the casino war. These were online casinos that the enemy had under their control. They were literally just saying, "Oh well, I need a." Was this pre-hypernet? Yes, this was way pre-hypernet. It's, oh, my SRP bill is 100 billion, and they would just go to the casino and they would get 100 billion ISK. They were not banned. They were not against the EULA or rules of any kind. They were subsequently um, stated by CCP as no, you can't do this. But that was after the casino war was over. That's when they came out and did that. Pretty much. Yeah, it pretty much. It was one guy who did that. There were multiple casinos at that point, but there was one big guy who had, untold trillions of ISK, and so he fronted and paid for the entire war with that. Um, that one is. Uh, it's a really old story with that one. It's in the Empires of Eve and everything like that. Um, Sadis, do you want to tell it? Yep, that's it. And that's what started the casino war. Uh, I mean that's Eve for you. So we lost. Yeah, so we lost deck. We moved to low sec. We stayed in low sec. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's one of those things of like, so did they take the money? Yeah, they did. Um, but this is the scale that we're talking about is when you're sitting there and you're like, well, a trillion ISK is a rounding error to them. That's how much money we're talking about at that point in time. Uh, and this is again, this is almost 10 years ago, right? This was the casino war. Well, okay, not 10 years, it was like 8 years ago. Um, you know, ISK, there's been a whole lot of inflation. So how did casinos work? Was it in game? There was an in-game browser at that point in time, so that you could do that, but it was linked to your Eve account. You could move, like you could rat and get ISK and move that to the casino. You could pay real money to the casino and gamble with ISK and then move it in. It was shady as hell, but you could do it either way. So we're living in Losec. We stayed there for a little while, not a huge amount of time, but a while. Get everybody evacuated out there. We then moved down to Deck. We staged in. We started our invasion into one TAC S from the north, out of Sact, and we just spread out from there, basically just pushing everybody out who was here. Some people just left. Right, they did not challenge us. Some people did. We had multiple capitals. We had a capital in one tech S at the time because we moved in there and we started from there. We then jumped down and jumped down and jumped down, ending up in 1DQ where our capital is today. But we moved through. So one tech S for sure. We had a capital in D tech W for a while, and then 1DQ. Um, Apple or anybody else? Did we have another one? I think it was just those three. And that's where. And now we've been in Delve this entire time. Yeah, we used to siege. Yeah, we sieged everything. Yeah, and the thing to remember also is when we get into this point, um, supers and titans could take um, gates, right? That's the mechanic that they've got now. Um, when we originally, most of these stories that I'm telling you, they could not. You would have to sino them everywhere, right? Supers and titans can do them now, but when at the beginning they could not. And that's where you get the memes of like the Trail of Tears and all this kind of stuff going through it. Um, Valeris, I'm not sure which one you're referencing to on that one. But so we're living in Delve, right? We conquer Delve. We do all that. Oh yeah, the awful loss of the day. Yes, I forgot about that. That was a thing on the forums where you would get a call out for is something. It was some kind of a loss for that day. But yes, that was it. I forgot about that. Lars, that's a good one. That was a page on the forums. The point then we're in Delve, right? Everything's kind of going pretty well. Um, I was still in Weedot at that point in time. I had been made SRP guy. I did the SRP for Weedot itself. This is coming up to also when we're getting into the idea of the Halloween War that I mentioned before. That was the Battle of B Tech R that had occurred before all of this. Um, and it's the little things. I was not actually in B Tech R to begin with. I was with one of the support fleets sieging the enemy stations. They had 3 or 4 reinforcement stations. They were trying to get their people out of to get us in B Tech R. I was on one of those. We were camping some station. I couldn't even tell you. It was an outpost, camping some outpost. Couldn't even tell you where it was now. And ping comes out from recon saying that they need more recons into BTAC R for our caps, for our fleets to get in. Well, I had a recon. I was in scouts at that point in time. I think that ping went to scouts. Um, and I volunteered to it. It's like, well, I can do that. I managed to get my Falcon past a couple of gate camps into BTACR, get it set up, and I was in there for several hours with the ships, whatever it was. We would bring in new dreadnoughts, new carriers, whatever needed to come in. We're coming in on our silos. I was there then, and it turns out I didn't know who this person was who had pinged for these silos. It turned out that she was head of recon at the time. And because I had answered her and agreed to do it, and I was talking to her, and then actually managed to get my Falcon, we all used Falcons at the time, which pretty much we still do now, managed to get my Falcon through all the gate camps. Um, it marked her in her mind, apparently, as somebody who could do recon esque work. And within about a year, I had been brought into doing more stuff with it, and it was because of that, these little things of somebody sent a ping out, and it's like, well, yeah, I'll come and do that. Um, and I ended up getting into recon from that, where I've been for quite a number of years now. Um, and then so we're gonna jump back forward. That was the Halloween War in BTAC-R. A whole bunch of videos, whole bunch of stories about BTAC-R if you want to see it. As somebody mentioned in Fleet, it was a um, Sov bill that was not paid by the enemy. They claim that there was money in the wallet. CCP says that they did not check the automatic withdrawal box. We don't know, but it ended up being at the time the largest engagement of capitals and super capitals in Eve's history was at BTAC-R. It's not it's not anymore, but at the time it was, right? M2 eclipsed it by a lot, but BTAC-R was the most there. And if you go out there today, there is a graveyard of all the Titans and everything killed. There's a huge debris field out there and to memorialize that. That's where that one happened. We fought a couple other small wars in between, uh, right? The Halloween War, and then what we call Vietnam, which, as you all know, started in 2020. We're going up through. I was chair of classes at this point in time, so late, you know, 2018, 2019. I was chair of classes for Gooniversity. Um, and I got that job because of the man whose Keepstar is named after. That we're sitting here right now, the McMahonfest Keepstar. This Keepstar is named after Ted McMahonfest. I knew him as head of what would become Gooniversity. It wasn't called Gooniversity then; it was called Little Bees at that point in time. He was head of that program, and I was sitting around one day, the old meme of goons can't tackle. Another guy I know named Fuyan, he and I were sitting there one day. We're like, we want to do something. We're bored. Let's do a scavenger hunt. So we did a scrap heap challenge scavenger hunt. We put a whole bunch of cans out in space. There was just a hull. You would warp your pod up to a hull. You'd get the hull. It had nothing in it. You would warp down to a can that said like guns or modules or ammo or miscellaneous, and you would have to build a ship. And then we did a big free for all brawl in this system. He and I got to talking. That was actually his idea to do that originally. I came in to help him just do like some of the management piece of it. Just all the numbers and everything like that. It's kind of what I do. He and I got into that. We did it a couple of times. And Ted apparently saw us doing this and said, "What are you two doing?" And we told him all about it. And he said, "I want you guys to do a class on tackling." We're like, we don't know shit about this. We're just throwing goons together and giving them guns and watching them shoot each other. We don't know what we're doing. And he ignored us and said, put together a tackle class. So we did. We put together a class on descanning and tackling. At the time, we called it WTF 102. And at the end of that class, we would do a little, almost like an AT thing. We would do a little, competition, and the last goon standing would get a prize. Couple of times when we did it, we would come up to somebody and we'd ask them, "Okay, you won first place. What do you like to do? Do you like to fly logi? Do you like to um, Do you like to rat? Do you like to do this? And whatever their answer was, we'd give them a cap that corresponded to that. So if they like to fly Logi, we would give them a triage carrier because again, faxes didn't exist then. We'd give them a triage carrier. If they're like, oh, well, I like to go do ratting, we'd give them just a regular carrier because that's what you did for ratting at that point in time. Um, if they're like, oh, we'd just like to go shoot people, we'd give them a dreadnought. And so that was the old 102 class. I've gotten into doing, yeah, sentry drone carriers was a thing back then. Again, carriers could use drones. They can't now, but they could back then. Your drone layout would be 3, 4, 500 drones in a carrier. It was ridiculous. In addition to the fighters, it was just your drone layout was just insane. Um, we finished that class, and I decided that I lived in wormhole space for a number of times. I'd done it twice for several months each time. It's like I do scanning all the time. It was one of the things that I used to do. So I made an offhand comment. Um, Again, you should never make an offhand comment where somebody might hear it. Ted heard me say this. I don't know how, but he did. About doing a scanning class. He's like, good, do it. And that's where the WTF 103 class came from, which was a class on combat probing and using combat probes. Um, I've done that class any number of times. I believe it was you and I were sitting one day, and you're like, hey, you should do that class for the FC. So I've done special FC versions of that on how to use on-grid locations. Might not have been you, Apple. I don't remember. I've done, I've done those. It might have been somebody else. I don't know. Um, yeah, doing this, trying to find, targets, warp ins, all those kinds of things using combat probes. We did those two classes for, 6 months, maybe a year. We did those. And we decided, what we should do? We should branch out. So we did classes on stealth bombers. We did classes on industry, on mining, on ratting, on fleets, and how you do all these kind of pieces. When we were done, the curriculum at the time went. Believe we had 10 or 12 classes. I wrote all of them except for one. For those of you in Karma Fleet, Elvalar, he wrote the mining class, but I wrote all of the others at that point in time. And that was what I did as chair of classes. So I was in recon then, and I was chair of classes. Um, I ended up in a group called Liberty Squad, which was a group run by Asher at the time, who was a USTZ group. It was just the USTZ group. There was the European Union, and Liberty Squad was the US version of that. I was in that group. It didn't last too all long, and then it was rebranded into the SIG that doesn't exist. Which, if you all know what I mean, you're chuckling right now. And if you don't, it's the SIG called Reavers. Um, Yep. So, uh, yeah, it was a scope video. So I was in Reavers, and Asher sent out a ping to Reavers. This would have been about 2018, I guess it was, and he asked for a volunteer to help him manage the SIG. Not to lead it. Um, Apple here is the FC. I am not an FC. I like bombers. I FC bombers. I do torp bombers. I do bomb bombers. That's what I do. Um, Apple, the other FC team, that's not me. Not what I do. I do the little ships. That's what I enjoy doing whenever I get a chance. So Azure didn't want help FCing that. He had himself and a couple others at the time. He needed help with like bookkeeping, processing applications and doing all those kinds of things. So I told him, sure, I can do that. So he got me set up, with those kind of pieces. And the very first day when I went and looked at how many applications were pending to Reavers, it was dozens and dozens of them. I just like 65, 70, 75 applications because Azure just didn't want to do it. And I was just like, Oh, no, no, no. Said he did not skip out on paperwork. He pawned the paperwork off on me. That's a distinction. I know. It's hard to believe, but it's true. Um, and so that's how I got into doing that. So I'd been a like a Reavers line member, in the group, doing that. Ended up doing the um, paperwork stuff for. Um, Technically, I still do that. I'm still I'm still the HR guy for Reavers, um, and we get to Reavers was a covert group. We would jump behind enemy lines there, especially in the days of pause warfare, and we would just ref pauses. We used to live out of pauses. We had what we called the corpse pause, and anytime we potted somebody and we got their corpse, we'd collect it and we'd put cans on the outside of our pause with their corpse in them, and we'd like rename it, like so, you'd have like the Asher Elias corpse, and we'd put their corpse into these cans, and we would just sit them there. And as long as you went back and opened it every so often, so many days, they would not despawn. And you could anchor one there too, but you could just put like just a regular can that wasn't anchored. As long as you just went and opened it every now and then, um, it would stay. They wouldn't despawn. And so we used to do things like that, ambush ratters and stuff like that. We had one, I think you all get a kick out of this. So we had uh, gone back to the north. So we were living in Delve, but we were back up north for one of the wars. This was before Vietnam. So this would have been about 2019, I guess, late 2018, early 2019. We were up north. We were based out of a lot of us were based out of Roar at that point in time. There was a couple of different bases, but Reavers itself was based out of Roar at that time. And we decided to go into Horde's staging system, and I honestly forget which system it was, but we were in Horde staging system, C4C. Yeah, we had bombers, nothing really special. We were just ambushing their routers. Well, what we totally didn't do is we totally didn't get somebody on Horde's comms to scream for help, and when the response fleet landed, we bombed them. Because we totally didn't do that because we are good people. Um, we actually ran out of ammunition doing that. We were sitting there and Asher's like, I guess we're gonna have to go home. And we all kind of whined and we're like, Asher, we don't want to go home. He's like, you bastards are out of ammo. We're like, oh, that's a good point. Um, and we killed quite a number of them. Simply because they would warp in to try and help this person who was screaming for help, and we were just sitting there waiting for them. But Asher timed it such that as they were decelerating out of warp, they could see our bombs flying at them, so they knew they were going to die and there was nothing they could do about it because they were decelerating out of warp as we fired our bombs at them. So that was something that we did. Again, that was 2018, 2019, something like that. So that story that Apple just told you, and the one I told you, is of course not true. We would never do that. Um, but yeah, so So at the time Apple's talking about this, where he's tackling supers and titans with rorquals, you originally you could not do that. You had to use like an interdictor or a Hictor to do this. It was changed because they had E-War immunity. It was changed years ago to where you can actually do that, and now heavy points on rorquals to tackle them. That's a thing. We've used that any number of times. But at the beginning, you could not do that. So the story we told about Shrike and everything like that, the first Titan, you could not point a Titan. That was not a thing back then. It is now. And if you look at it, it's okay, well, what's the warp strength on your super or your Titan? It's just a number. And if you've got enough scrams and long points, or just disruptors, some people call them, you can hold it there. You don't need an interdictor or a Hictor or anything like that. Bubbles, you don't need any of that stuff. So we're back to late 2019. Kind of everything's going as normal. We get into 2020. Um, as you all know, the pandemic is starting to come up. We're starting like, oh, this is kind of weird. This weird virus thing. Um, we get into the spring of 2020, moving into summer. And there starts to be rumors and grumblings that we're about to be attacked. Not an unusual state, pretty much happens constantly, that there's rumors and grumblings about us being attacked. Uh, and in the summer of 2020, Asher pings me out of the blue. Says, hey, can you get on comms for a minute? I just want to talk to you. I'm like, okay. I assumed he wanted to talk to me about something with Reavers because that was not an unusual occurrence. I was wrong. I was dead wrong on that. And he's waiting for me on comms. I join, and Mittens is there too. So it's me, Asher, and Mittens. And it's at that point where that meme, that gif, right, of that guy saying, and at this point he knew he fucked up, played through my head when I saw the two of them sitting in that channel. Uh, and what they had in mind was a new job for me. And that new job was to create a group called Procurement. And that's how I became a director, is from that point there when I joined Procurement. I waited about 10 minutes, and then I grabbed who is my number two in Procurement. Again, Carmel Fleet guys probably know him, Rat Knight. And I poked him and said, hey, Rat, can you join comms? I need your help for a minute. He also foolishly accepted, jumped in the channel, and now there's four of us. There's me, Rat Knight, Asher, and Mittens. And he pokes me on Discord, and he says, WTF. And that was it. That's all he basically said. Um, and so he ended up with me. We created Procurement then. This was the summer of 2020. Let's say June, because I don't remember exactly when it was. It was before Vietnam kicked off. We had created Procurement before that, but it was not very much before. Um, the point to most of the operations for Procurement, it's a group that is very secretive. We acknowledge there's three of us who are in Procurement. There's myself, Rat Knight, and Zentar, because our names are on the director list as being in there. And everybody else, we don't acknowledge who's in there. We won't tell you who's in there. Um, it's a very closely guarded group. You all have seen the work that we do here. For those of you who were in at the very beginning of Vietnam, how many of you remember the pings from Asher saying, get in an interceptor and join this fleet? And then you all flew out, usually the Fountain, to a Keepstar, and you docked up, and there was a Ferox there. That was Procurement. We built all those, we fitted them. I'll admit, GSOL moved almost all of them, but we fitted them up, we staged them there. That was a Procurement operation at the very beginning. So the Ospreys, this the logi for the Feroxes is the Osprey. If you all saw the Super Train video that has been linked by Asher the last about a week and a half that we've been doing the whole Keepstar stuff. If anybody's got that link handy and you can put it into Fleet right now, it's hilarious. Uh, I was brand new to the directorate at the time. I had just joined. I had just, moved through this kind of stuff. I'd been in Ilum about 2 days, 3 days, something like that, when this idea came down for the Feroxes. Um, and Atrum put together 3,700 Feroxes. I will say that number again: 3,700 ospreys. Ospreys. 3,700 ospreys. I think I said Feroxes earlier. That was a mistake. 3,700 ospreys. So when you see that reference in that video, that is absolutely true. He built 37. Well, he actually had another corporation build 3,700 ospreys. Um, Mittens was a little annoyed. I was annoyed. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with 3,700 ospreys? I will admit, to Atrum's credit, I did use all of them eventually. We just used the last one about 3 months ago, 2 months ago. Um, but yeah, that's where that comes from in that video. When you see that, Atrum built 37 ospreys for some reason. We asked him why he did it. He's like, well, I got a good deal on them. It's like, okay. Uh, each fleet needs about 20 or 30 of them. So he built enough Ospreys for over 100, Keepstar defense fleets. We didn't have 100 Keepstars at that point in time. So we just had a whole bunch of those. That is a good story, Apple. Thanks for reminding me on that one. Um, we're coming into the fall of 2020. Vietnam kind of kicking off. Things are getting a little crazy. Uh, as some of you all know, I was taken down with a pretty bad infection. I was down until after the first of the year. That year, I went into the hospital on a Thursday, and I was in the ICU less than 24 hours later. I ended up having to have a tracheotomy. I was on a full ventilator. I actually died when I was in the ICU. Saw the white light, whole 9 yards, that kind of thing. Actually heard the code blue called to my room, which is freaky. Uh, got done after about a month in the ICU, and I was transferred to a rehab facility. I was there for about 7 weeks. I came home just before Thanksgiving 2020. I had to relearn how to walk. I had to relearn how to actually breathe. Um, the muscles I lost 50 pounds of muscle. Um, and it turns out that your diaphragm is a big ass muscle. Um, so I actually had that whole thing going down. Uh, couldn't really walk. I was actually blind when I was there because there's a little muscle in your eye. Couldn't actually see. It was pretty crazy. It was pretty hardcore. So if you go back and listen to some of the firesides back at that point in time, you actually hear Asher talking a little bit about that. Uh, got done with that. This would begin Thanksgiving time frame. Uh, I was so weak that I literally couldn't walk downstairs, and my big desktop is downstairs. So I actually had to sit on my phone, which I couldn't actually hold because my arms were so weak, and try and talk to people on Discord through my phone. Um, and so I did that for about 2 months until M2. So right at the Battle of M2 is when I was able to, and I had in-home, physical therapy and all that kind of stuff. The Battle of M2 is when I was first able to sit back at my desktop and actually do something. I missed the first Battle of M2. I was there. So if any of you all were in M2 for like fighter reships or fighter bombers, I did most of that SRP myself because it was what I could do. I could sit and do a few of those things. Procurement built a few fighters. I tallied it at one point in time for the data porn that I gave to Ilum on what procurement had done, and my estimate was thousands of fighters had been built by procurement just for M2, just to do SRP for that. We pre-staged fighters all over the place subsequently. This is again at that point in time, we had been pushed down into the 1DQ constellation. You got to remember, we just had a handful of systems there. Uh, that brought us to M2. You all know kind of the history of the war after that. It went on, a little bit longer from there. But M2, I mean, really kind of put the writing on the wall that it was going to end the way that we thought it would. We weren't 100% sure, but we all kind of thought that was going to be what ended up happening. And then when they did the whole let's unanchor the keep stars while a fleet is engaged, for those of you who weren't here for that, they did actually do that. We were stunned. We logged in multiple horde alts ourselves because we couldn't believe the reports we were getting from scouts. We're like, no, there's no way they're doing this. I think pretty much everybody logged in a horde alt and undocked from that keep star to actually look at it ourselves. We're like, oh shit, he actually did it. That ended effectively the Vietnam War when he did that. Um, and then we subsequently went on to the Reconquista of Delve, as a lot of people say. And then Apple is back to doing his, let me conquer Delve again, and shooting structures, shooting pocos, hunting down fleets, doing all those kind of things. Um, and at the time as well that I was put into procurement as a director there, I was made a finance director late 2020, and those are the roles, that I still hold today. So that was a huge ass story. I hadn't intended to take like 2.5 hours with these guys. I had to apologize for that, but um, that brought us up basically to the middle of 2020, late 2020, and then into 21, right, late 21. After that was pretty kind of quiet. 22, we didn't have a whole lot. We had the war in the southeast, um, and doing all those kind of things. There wasn't a huge amount to that one. So 21 was finishing up Vietnam, quiet for about a year into 22. And then, as you all know, we have the war that we just finished up north. And that kind of brings us to where we are. I think we'll call it a day / night there. But before I do that, does anybody have any last questions? If you want to put it into Fleet again. So how did we finish the war? Are you talking about Valeris? Are you talking about Vietnam? Or are you talking about the one up north? Right, this last one, B2. Vietnam ended because Villy is a dumbass. Honestly, he unanchored that keep star, and when he did that, he showed to his own people that they couldn't trust him. And after that, their morale crumbled into nothing. It's not like the war ended the instant he pushed that button, but that domino could not be reset when he did that. Their fleets never truly recovered from that. It took weeks to push them out of Delve. Right, this is not an instantaneous thing. Took weeks and weeks to push them out of Delve. But something that you can see in the data, if you go back and look at it, is the isotopes prices. Um, he created a massive fuel shortage across the entire galaxy because every hordling, remember Brave was part of that coalition at the time. Everybody in Brave, everybody in Horde, everybody in NC Dot, everybody in Frat now realized that they were on their own. And here's the kicker that makes Willie such a dick. He evacuated his stuff first. Well, and his high command did too. They left the line people behind. Uh, and so, yeah. And so what we did, as soon as we heard about this, a goon totally did not go to Jita and buy every isotope on the market and then mark them up like 10 times. We totally did not do that. Please go ahead, Apple. I do remember that. Sorry, Civilization, you're asking about, how why are we friends with Brave now? It's, the Brave leadership did change. Um, the the CEO now is not who it was during Vietnam. Dirk stepped down for that. Um, but it's something that, Brave was in their. It's a really interesting one. If you look at the Pappy Snowden leaks and all that kind of thing that came out at the time, uh, Brave felt like they were backed into a corner on there, and you can see them talking to each other, saying, "We're screwed, uh, but what do we do?" Um, and so when I was manning Keep Stars, well, not Keep Stars, but any structure, um, I would target Brave first because we knew they were the poorest, they were the weak link, and so if there was um, a fleet on grid, and there was a brave guy and there was a horde guy, I would shoot the brave guy first. And we cost them a lot by doing that, by specifically targeting them. Um, and again, horde screwed them on so many things, and you saw that again from all those leaks that came out. That they didn't have control of their keep star until that was leaked, and then horde's like, "Oh, oops, my bad. Here's the keep star." Um, that kind of thing. Mr. Harry, we never that Pappy Snowden's identity was never released. It was a closely guarded secret. I honestly don't even know who it was. Ilum was never briefed on who that was. It was held closest chest people. Um, so Mittens has always said it was him. You can take that for what it is. He never told us. He never told Ilum who it actually was. Yeah, go ahead. We'll do questions for another like 5 minutes or so, and then we'll head out. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. So the betrayal of CO2 at the beginning of the Casino War. Basically, what ended up happening is uh, betrayal is a perfect word for it. CO2 was an Imperium. Sorry, Imperium didn't exist then. It was the CFC alliance. They were members with it. Sorry, didn't have my button. So CO2 was a CFC alliance there at the beginning of the Casino War. We were moving our super cap fleet, and they had set up a pause for us to be able to jump to, right? So you'd have a secure path to do this. K Color looked at this path and said, that path is kind of stupid. We're going to go this way. And he took a different route. And that is why we have a super cap fleet today, because K Color looked at the route and was like, that's kind of dumb. Why aren't we going this way? And so he did his own move to it. CO2 had betrayed us already at that point. The enemy had an entire fleet sitting there just waiting for us to jump in, and they would have annihilated our entire super fleet if K Color had not looked at the map and said, that's weird. Why are we going that way? We're going to go this way. So subsequently after that, right, is where the logs start getting leaked and all those kind of pieces. So at the time we didn't know that. Um, it was after that super fleet was safe. That's when CO2 fully turned on us openly. They turned on us, and that's when everybody realized. And there's actually a picture, a meme of this with K Color's avatar on it and everything like that. Uh, that he saved us, and he did. He saved a considerable. It wasn't every super in Titan we had because not everybody's online. But he saved a huge chunk of the Super Cat fleet that day. They did go through some internal uh, torment and everything like that. So they have collapsed and aren't a thing anymore. We shot them. I mean, we went and attacked them any number of times. Like I said, I like to FC bombers, so we used to reinforce their stuff with bombers and everything like that. But yeah, they just collapsed eventually. It's just one of those things. The the logs from that point, if you are in those channels and can see those logs, it's just utter stunning. It's just everybody's like, wait, what? It's just it was so unexpected. I was at work, so I didn't actually see this until I got home a few hours later, and then look through the channels. I'm just like, what the hell? It was incredible. Yeah. So the judge, yep, he did flip. There's a whole lot of these stories on like flipping alliances. The fall of Band of Brothers was done that way by Harkonnen. He's in sorry, it's Haggard. He's here in Goons. He came back actually for Vietnam. He was active around there. He's the reason for that piece. You get the judge doing that flip. Uh, some of the other people have engineered flips and everything like that. Where we've got them the loot pinata from so it would have been Spring 21 if you guys ran on that Keepstar loot pinata. Uh, I don't remember if we ever released who that person was, and I don't want to say their name if we had not. But one of our people engineered that. Um, so these are the kind of stories that you get. So the fighters that Apple was just talking about, yeah, it's something like 1,000, 1,500 of them, and we would put them in a can, and then like you all would send in a fighter SRP request, and I would pull out their fighters to give to you to shoot them. And there's many that anything that Apple wants to declassify from a certain squad, that's his business to do. But there was a lot of those kind of capers. The uh, the isotope one that we told you all about, that one wasn't even an IS person or ILM or anything. That was just some random line goon member heard about it and was like, "What the hell?" Logged in his GDALT and bought every isotope on the market and then relisted them like 10 times higher. And it so Villy's unanchoring of that Keepstar in 1DQ, sorry, in T5Z. Yeah, Am I blaming the wrong person? I don't know. Billy's still an ass. Whatever. Yeah, it was still blame Billy. um, yeah, this trip PGL is with us. Billy's still an ass. But that fuel crisis um, took months to fix. It was just months and months because everybody was panic buying. Um, and the other one too, you've seen this a couple of times, is people will rename a beacon in a different system to the same place that they're going to, and unfortunately, there's two right along. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, it depends on your perspective. When they retreated, they passed by two systems that have almost identical names, and they renamed uh, bad guys, quote unquote bad guys, renamed the jump beacon in that system, or they would have sinos in that other system, and people would blindly jump to the wrong sino and they just get popped. I don't even know how many carriers and dreads and faxes. I think even some super and a Titan got caught on those on occasion. But yeah, jump freighters, rorquals, anything like that, um, and they would just get annihilated. Jules, so Vili has a long history with us. Test was in right Deco in the CFC um, a decade ago. Um, but yeah, we don't really care for him. But he does have a long history with us. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting one. Test leadership at one point in time, over about 2 or 3 weeks, it was a joke that was actually true. As we're like, well, who's the head of Test right now? Because they had 4 or 5 executors, I swear, in like 3 weeks. They just kept changing, um, and I couldn't even tell you who all of them were because they kept changing so much. And it's just it's a really interesting thing to see now where they are and how they're doing it. Of course, the principal enemy to us is Horde, has been for a long time. Technically, Frat is as well, because they're together, right? That's the whole Pappy thing is Frat and Horde right now. NC, sure, technically, kinda. It's mostly Frat and Horde. All right, guys. After 2.5 hours, I think we'll call it a day. So thank you all for coming. I hope this was interesting. I'm gonna put this up and post it once everything actually works and I figure out how to do that. So I've recorded it. So if you've missed something, I hope all the audio actually is working. I tested earlier and it was working. We'll see if it actually captured everything correctly. But you all have a good day, night, morning, wherever you are in the Eve universe and the real world, and do be safe if you're traveling or anything like that. Uh, yeah, I'm glad you all enjoyed it. All right, guys, have a good night.